to the show. This is The Law Show on CL 650.
Walter Rainey, about done yourself. Mind games, John Lennon. Well played, sir. The Law Show here on CL 650. We're talking about the anatomy of a brain injury. We have a special guest with us today, Liz Barron, Secretary of the BC Brain Injury Association, along with Joe Murphy from MurphyBattista law firm in downtown Vancouver. Now, we've been talking about what is traumatic brain injury and concussions, and this is Super Bowl Sunday, and all of that kind of is top of mind with pro athletes. We see that in the news. So what kind of treatment? Joe, you mentioned that a lot of the clients that you see, 85% recover and go back to a normal life. Is that what you're seeing when you're working with people? I guess it depends on the level of the injury, right?
It really does depend on the extent of the injury. I mean, I've certainly worked with clients who come through to full recovery as well, but there's certainly clients out there that it is a lifelong recovery process, and one that changes as they develop through their recovery, and so it can be ongoing. So
when you say that somebody recovers, is it a physical injury that the brain is repairing itself, or is it a way of learning your life because it's a powerful organ and it is able to adapt? So does it adapt to the new life, or does it physically recover?
I think it's a great question, and it's both. I mean, we've seen in the literature and in the science that we now have that the brain actually does have the capacity to heal itself. Not always completely, but it certainly can adapt as well. So I think actually it's often both, that you see some physical recovery, but it's learning to do things differently and learning to compensate for some of the difficulties that you might be having after the injury.
And that you see that with some stroke victims. They have a stroke and then they come back, and others do not, right? That's obviously a part of the brain is being starved of oxygen. That's part of the reason. So do you see that with brain injuries as well, where part of the brain just never, ever comes back, doesn't respond? Is that part of it? I guess with if the head is physically injured, right?
Yeah, we absolutely do. So in cases where there's been some, I guess, fatal damage of certain areas of the brain, you're looking at learning to do things differently. And in some of the literature out there, we see that there are other parts of the brain that will take on some of that functioning as well. But then we're also coaching clients to use a different hand to do something, as a concrete example, or find a activity that's more realistic within their capabilities. But it's interesting because stroke, as you'd mentioned, it's often confusing for people if brain injury is different than stroke. I mean, stroke is just one type of brain injury, certainly, and we're quite fortunate in that we're, with the Brain Injury Association, we're trying to help people to understand that as well. So we've actually got an opportunity on March 3rd where we're putting on a showcase and celebration for brain injury at the Coast Coal Harbour in Vancouver, and that is in conjunction with the Stroke Collaborative. So we are trying to bring these worlds of stroke and brain injury together, because the effects for the folks who have sustained either of these types of injuries are really the same. You're still dealing with some kind of an injury to the brain. So
now, Joe, with your practice, you deal with a lot of vehicle accidents, right?
Yes.
Now, I just want to, because this is part of my career is following the automobile industry, and you obviously are dealing with people who have been involved in accidents. With all of the advanced safety features that have been added to cars, airbags, all the different traction control, stability, and now these forward collision warning and braking systems, are you seeing at your end a decrease in the number of serious injuries?
Ironically,
I guess you probably only see the people who have been injured.
Ironically, no, but there's no question that seatbelts are a good idea and usually reduce or avoid injuries, and airbags are a good idea and often reduce or avoid injuries. But I think what happens is people drive faster.
Yeah, feel invincible.
When they have this ABS brakes. In Vancouver, they have the signs that count down into when the yellow light is going to activate for cars. There's more people going through intersections late with that. They see the countdown and think, I want to get through, so they speed up. So they are seatbelts particularly, but a seatbelt doesn't guarantee you that you're going to avoid an injury. And sometimes seatbelts can cause injuries, particularly a lap belt. So, yes, these are good advances. Yes, these make the world safer for us, but we seem to be driving faster, and as a result, it's sort of counterbalanced. So these people are still injured. Whether the concussions or brain injuries from accidents, car accidents now is higher or lower, I don't know. There's a different awareness. But having said that, Zach, I want to add one thing. If you have a concussion in an accident, there's an 85 to 90% chance you'll recover within days or weeks or maybe about 3 months. So it's only if the problems continue beyond that you have to really worry. So if I have a friend who says I have a concussion in an accident, should I go and see a neurologist at a week or 2 or 3 post-accident? I'll say no. Make sure your doctor understands what's happening. But the good news is the odds are you're going to recover. You're going to go back to your normal functioning. So you don't have to run off to see a specialist when you're having problems from a concussion, because usually they go away.
So when you're dealing with somebody after an accident, are you dealing with them in the public sphere, right? Do you work in the private at all, like funded by the government and non-funded? How does it work for somebody who's had a brain injury? How do they access care? Can they go to their employer's health plan? Can they go just to the government system?
So we have a number of different options in British Columbia, and I work in the public and the private sectors. So certainly when people are moving through the hospital-based system, they have access to medical and rehab care if that's available to them. Like, depending on the extent of their injury, we only have funding for certain types of injuries, of certain severities for certain periods of time. Once folks are back in the community, there is access to support depending on where you live. I mean, BC is a very large province, and your access to resources publicly is going to vary depending on where you live. In my experience, what is available to these folks publicly is not enough, which is, again, part of what we're striving to raise awareness and change in BC. And I see that working with clients both publicly and privately. For clients who have access to private resources, whether it's through a successful tort claim or whatever the source of funds are, they're able to access kinds of care that allow them to really continue to improve and grow in a way that gets them back into their community and having a purpose and function, more so than I think certainly some clients who only have access to public resources are able to.
One thing I would touch on, because it's expensive to go into private health care if you need any expert advice, and obviously retaining an attorney to fight Goliath, right? What about the critical care insurance? Is this something you've seen in your practice where people who I know I have this, or if you have one of the main biggies, a heart attack, a stroke, and all these kind of things, you get a lump sum payment. Have you seen that at all in your practice where people have been able to access that?
I haven't seen that, but I have had clients come to me with the critical care insurance, and they come to me because they've had some medical event. And the insurance company said, well, yeah, but that's not what's covered under the policy.
Right.
So these policies are written so carefully that the insurance company is not going to cover every heart attack unless it meets a certain criteria. I had a client who had a stroke, and the insurance company balked at paying because they say the stroke didn't qualify under the exact wording of the policy. It required ongoing objective neurological symptoms for at least 30 days following the stroke. She was lucky because she recovered quite well from the stroke, but her neurologist said she obviously had ongoing neurological problems. Her gait, or the way she walked, was different. So we needed to get a report from him, and then they reluctantly paid. But the idea of critical care insurance, something bad happens, you want to make sure you get paid. That's a great idea. But you have to really be careful about the wording. And like any insurance policy, it's the fine print that an insurer will often rely on to avoid having to pay. They love to take the premium, but they're reluctant.
I've been paying for almost 20 years, and thank goodness I haven't had to use it. But I just thought of that when you were talking about the private versus the public sector, and you have to access that. And if you don't have the funds and you could use it, maybe a policy like that would work. So that's great advice. Good. We're getting fantastic legal advice on insurance here at the last minute for people thinking about that. When we come back, I want to talk about what is intensive rehab. How that works. And we talked about the social capital. That's people helping other people in your immediate circle get you through it. And what kind of other community resources we have for people who are suffering from brain injury. We have Liz Barron here, the secretary of the BC Brain Injury Association, along with Joe Murphy from MurphyBattista in Vancouver. We're talking The Law Show. I'm Zach Spencer. We'll continue our conversation about the anatomy of brain injury next on CL 650.
There's more of the show still ahead. This is The Law Show on CL 650.